In this video, we're going to overview a concept called source control using a piece of software called GitHub. So what source control is, in the world of IT, particularly for software developers, we run into the problem where large groups of developers have to work on the same code base. That means they have to open up the same files and make changes, and you get into the whole mess where people can open up the same files at the same time and overwrite each other's changes and all of these things, which can just be a big mess and cause lots of inefficiencies and lost work time and all of these things. And also, if you think about any large piece of software, I mean, the code base for, let's say Facebook is huge. There would be millions and billions of lines of code. And so you need some way of managing and maintaining all of that so that people aren't overwriting work and, it's all organized and thousands of people can, all work within the same code base for a piece of software at the same time without, just getting into a big mess. So source control is an idea where essentially you create a large centralized repository of all of the source code files is created. And what that allows us to do is it's one central area. And let's just say if I'm a developer at, let's say, Facebook, and I am tasked with making some changes to the registration page, for new users, I can go and I can download that without worrying about other people working on it at the same time and overwriting my changes. So I can check that out, make my changes, and then once I've made my changes, tested them, and I'm satisfied with my work, I can then re-upload that or commit that to the centralized repository. And then if another developer comes in tomorrow to work on the same registration page, they can just download it. They can, and they'll get all of my changes, and they don't need to worry about any conflicts or overwriting my work. They can see any notes that I've made when I committed the changes, so they can keep track of what work was done and all that stuff. So it really makes managing the project that you're working on far simpler for everybody involved. Source control has a number of things that it allows you to do. Here's a few of the the highlights. So it's a centralized online repository of all of your work. It's accessible by multiple developers. In the case of our class, it will also be something that I will have access to so that I can monitor and evaluate any work that you're doing. It also functions as a secondary backup. So at a very high level, here's how it works. When you create, let's say, a brand new Python program, you are going to write the code, you'll save it into a file on your external hard drive. So you'll have, just a file, called whatever, myfirstprogram.py will be the file extension for it, and that'll be sitting in a folder somewhere on your hard drive. Now the problem there is, what if you mistakenly, lose your hard drive, or you knock it off the table and it dies? Unfortunately, that does happen, to all of us at times. Welcome to working in IT. But in that case, if you only have the one copy, that work is gone. And the further we get into the semester and the more work you've done, the higher the risk is that if you lose or break your hard drive, that you lose more and more work. So nobody wants that for anybody. So the idea of creating backups is a mantra in IT that hopefully you will get the good habits. We'll introduce good habits to you, so you'll get in the habit of backing things up frequently. But source control can mitigate that a little bit, because when we are making that first program I mentioned, instead of just saving a local copy on your external hard drive, I mean, that will be your working copy where you'll, if you went in to make some changes to that program, the next day, you would still go to that local file. But if you're hooked up to source control, what you can also do is, instead of just saving that file, you get in the habit of saving it and committing it. And now commit is the terminology that we typically use. You'll also hear me say the word push or pull. And what I mean is I'm taking, if I say push, I'm taking a copy of that local file and I'm pushing it to your online repository, which means a secondary copy is created in the cloud online somewhere. So then now all of a sudden you have two copies of your work. So if you lose your hard drive tomorrow, you roll your eyes and you grumble a little bit and you go, ah, that sucks, and it does. But you haven't lost the work because, worst case scenario, you get a new hard drive, you just go to your online repository and you just download everything that's you had done up to that point when you lost it. So if you're in the habit of committing often, like every time that you do any work and save it, whether it's an exercise or an assignment or a project or whatever, the more frequently that you save, the more insulated you are against, catastrophic failure in terms of, losing all your files and losing all your work. So source control functions as a de facto backup of all our work. Another big benefit to source control is it allows you to actually version your work. So let's say I go in and I create that little first program today, and it just prints "Hello World" on screen, and I save and I commit that. Now I have my local copy and I have an online copy of that. So if I come in the next day and I say, oh, I'm going to change that program so that it does 10 other brand new things and enhance the program, when I save that in a standard save on your file system, unless you save as a new file, the default behavior is it would overwrite the copy of the file. So that's well and good in most cases, but what you've lost is you've lost a copy or a record of the work as it was yesterday. But if you commit that work twice, what source control does is it actually saves them automatically as two separate files. So basically two different versions. Now, why is that important? Well, as programs and files management get far more complex, what that allows you to do is at any point I can go back to a previous version. So let's say you're working on a final project for programming for me later on in the semester, and you work on it for a few days and you get it to a pretty good state where you're pretty happy, and it's not done yet, maybe you're 3/4 done, and then the next day you come in and I don't know, maybe you're tired or there was something you didn't understand and you write a bunch of code and it breaks the whole thing. And you're like, oh no, this is due tomorrow. And you start freaking out because you're like, However, if you're using source control faithfully, you can just simply go back to a previous version. And so if you knew that everything that you had done up until yesterday worked just great and you had tested it and you were happy with it, if everything goes wrong today, instead of going through the exercise of trying to undo all the work you did today, and untangle the big ball of spaghetti that you're working with here, you can just simply cut your losses, go back to a previous point, and just say, okay, let's start again from the point when I knew that everything was good, and then just proceed again from there. This is very similar in conceptually to if you think of, say, playing any type of video games. I'm progressing through the levels, I beat a few bosses or whatever. Every time I do that, I create a save point. And that allows me to go, and so let's say I beat boss number 3 and I start going on the next level, and then my character dies. Instead of going back to the very beginning of the game and having to go all the way through all the levels and beat all the bosses up to that point again, and then hopefully get to that point and then proceed, I can just go back to the save point, right after I beat, boss number 3. And then I only have to redo the level where my character died. So I can just keep on repeating that. It's the same idea with software versioning. And you see this all the time. That's exactly what happens when you download some new app, or a new version of an app, and you'll see, my app version, 1.3.2. And then if you go in, a week later, maybe it's 1.3.3, and then maybe, 1.3.4, and then maybe later on it's 1.4, etc. Those are all just different versions of the same application, but with different, changes or features or enhancements put in them. The other big thing about source control, and this is the part that makes it mandatory in this class, is that we are going to be using it as one of the primary methods for submitting your work to me, your instructor, in class. So when you, let's say, complete an assignment, you will take it home or in class and you'll work on it until you're happy that it's your best work and it satisfies everything that I'm looking for the assignment. And then you will actually submit and commit your work with some comments just saying, this is the final copy that I wish you to evaluate, and you will submit that to your online repository. Now, the way that this will be set up, and I'll walk everyone through this in class and probably create a video for setting it up. But essentially what I've done is for every student, I've created a private online repository on a website called github.com that I will assign to everyone on the first day of class. And with a little bit of setup that we'll do for it, but essentially you and I, so each student and myself, will have access to a private repository. So I'll be able to go in and look at your code at any point, along our journey through the course. That's very helpful for both of us because I can go in and evaluate your work and kind of see your progress over time, which is very helpful for me to assess where you are and any problems that you might run into and all that stuff. It also gives us kind of a two-way street. If you are looking for extra help and you drop by my office and say, I just can't get this line of code to work, it doesn't make sense, we can very quickly just open it up, say in my office, and I could just grab a copy of your code and we can look at it right then and there, instead of you going through the exercise of copying and pasting it everywhere and all that. So the website that we're going to be using is something called github.com. So it's github.com. Just so you're aware, GitHub is the source control that we're going to be using for this course. It is one of the most popular out there, but it is not the only one. Just to give a plug for source control in general, if you are going to be a programmer or any form of developer in IT, whether it's GitHub or not, you will be using source control. I virtually guarantee it. I don't think I'd want to work for a company that didn't manage all of their source code using source control. So it just causes so many headaches and causes so many problems. So github.com is the website that we're going to be going. Again, I've created a private repository. I'll walk through this in one of the first days of classes. But it will give us an option to kind of go through and see all these things. You will need to create a user account with github.com. I've already created an account, obviously, so what you're seeing on screen here, I don't, it doesn't give me the option to create a new account, but you can do that. It's a button that's up front and center when you get on the website for the first time. If you already have a GitHub account from your previous work or previous classes you've taken or something like that, and you want to work and you want to use that account, that is completely fine. That's up to you. One other thing to make note of here, though, is just when you are creating your GitHub account, which every student will have to do, there's kind of two sides to the coin here. When you are signing up with an email address, which they'll ask you for, you have the option of either using your NSCC email address that you've been provided with the college, or your own personal email address. Either one is fine. I would lean a little bit more personally towards using your college address, simply because that just kind of keeps it, the line between your college work and your personal work, kind of a little bit distinct. So that would be my recommendation. However, you can make a pretty good argument for saying that if you use your personal address, then after your 2 years in the program and you've graduated, you will still have full access to all the work that you did in your classes while you were here. That's not saying that you'll lose access later on, but you'd have to go through the exercise of copying things, from your college repository to your own personal one, which might sound like a bunch of work, but honestly, most second year students I've talked to, they end up doing that anyways. But having a copy of all of your work that you have for your entire duration of time, your 2 years in the program, can be very valuable. You can go and you can look up all the work that you've done before. So if you were on a brand new job and you're like, oh, we did something similar to that in one of my courses, you can go back and look at the code. It also is a really good spot for putting things in for your portfolio when you're out looking for jobs and things like this. So that's just kind of that's a choice that each student will have to make individually. Neither one, they both have their pros and cons, but either one is fine. It's really up to you. So I'll have a later video where we walk through the specifics of how to actually set up your GitHub repository. But I just wanted to give an introduction to that so that everyone has an idea of what source control is generally and what it is.